Legal frameworks and standards represent the final analytical stage of a workplace investigation, the point where all the evidence is brought together and translated into a defensible conclusion. By this stage, the focus is no longer on gathering information, but on applying the appropriate rules and thresholds to determine what the evidence actually proves. While workplace investigations often draw on legal principles, they are not criminal proceedings. Instead, they are governed by employer policies and administrative standards designed to ensure fairness, practicality, and procedural integrity. The objective at this stage is straightforward but critical: to ensure that findings are not based on intuition or assumption, but on reasoned conclusions supported by substantial evidence, conclusions that can withstand scrutiny from courts, arbitrators, or human rights tribunals, if challenged. A key part of this process is understanding how evidence is treated under administrative rules. Unlike criminal courts, which apply strict evidentiary exclusions, workplace investigations and related proceedings, such as arbitration or employment hearings, generally allow a much broader range of information to be considered. However, admissibility is not the same as reliability. Almost everything may be admitted, but not everything carries equal weight. Evidence must still be assessed for its quality and relevance. In doing so, investigators often rely on what can be thought of as three foundational criteria. Evidence must be competent, reliable, and appropriate for consideration, relevant, connected to the issue at hand, and material, significant enough to influence the outcome. Within this framework, some forms of evidence carry particularly strong weight. For example, a properly obtained admission is often the most persuasive form of proof and may be sufficient on its own to support disciplinary action. In contrast, hearsay, while sometimes permitted in workplace settings, generally carries less weight because the original source cannot be directly examined. The standard of proof then sets the threshold for decision-making. In most workplace and civil contexts, this is the balance of probabilities, meaning the investigator must decide whether it is more likely than not that the alleged conduct occurred. Importantly, this standard remains consistent, regardless of how serious the allegation is. It does not increase simply because the consequences may be severe, such as termination. This principle has been reinforced in Canadian jurisprudence, which emphasizes stability and consistency in the application of the standard. It is also essential to distinguish workplace investigations from criminal processes. Investigators are not required to prove matters beyond a reasonable doubt. Attempting to apply that higher threshold in an administrative context can lead to unnecessary over-investigation, and may prevent reasonable findings from being made where the evidence is otherwise sufficient. Instead, the focus is on whether a fair and reasonable investigation has been conducted, and whether the resulting conclusion is one that an ordinary, informed person would consider justified. Once the evidence has been assessed under the appropriate standard, the next step is to explain how conflicting information has been resolved. Investigators must separate undisputed facts, where there is agreement or clear supporting evidence, from disputed facts, where accounts diverge. In these disputed areas, a clear rationale must be provided for preferring one version over another. This reasoning is typically grounded in credibility assessment, including factors such as inherent plausibility, motive to misrepresent, consistency, and whether the account aligns with the overall harmony of the evidence when viewed under the balance of probabilities. Importantly, investigators are not permitted to avoid difficult decisions simply because accounts conflict. Treating contradictory versions as equally valid without analysis risks what is effectively a denial of justice in an administrative context. The expectation is that a determination will be made based on which version is more likely than not, supported by evidence and reasoned analysis. Only where the evidence is truly balanced and cannot be reasonably resolved should a finding be classified as inconclusive or unsubstantiated. Finally, the way findings are written is just as important as the reasoning behind them. A properly constructed report must clearly show the logical path from evidence to conclusion. This includes distinguishing between factual findings and legal conclusions. Investigators should not make determinations such as whether someone harassed another person in a legal sense. Instead, They should identify the underlying facts such as specific statements or behaviors and allow decision-makers to apply policy or legal standards to those facts. Each finding must be explicitly tied to supporting evidence, whether that is witness testimony, documents, digital records, or other objective data. A defensible report must also be balanced, reflecting both evidence that supports and evidence that challenges the conclusion. Omitting contradictory information undermines credibility just as much as including inaccurate information. Ultimately, findings must be written in clear, policy-aligned language that allows a third party to follow the reasoning, understand the evidence, and independently assess whether the conclusion is justified. In this way, legal frameworks and standards do not simply close an investigation, they give it structure, discipline, and defensibility.